My name is Margaret Chen, and this is how I discovered that my son's wife had been systematically stealing my identity, hijacking my finances, and manipulating my own child against me, all while I was away on what should have been a peaceful senior center trip to San Francisco. What she didn't know was that my late husband Robert had taught me more about protecting assets than she could ever imagine. And some passwords simply cannot be changed by anyone except the rightful owner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I walked through my front door that Tuesday evening in October and found my computer displaying a completely unfamiliar desktop wallpaper, I knew something was terribly wrong. But it wasn't until I tried to log into my own email account and was told my password was incorrect that I realized the true scope of what had been done to me in just 5 days. It started innocently enough. On a crisp Monday morning, in early October, I had been looking forward to the Golden Years Senior Center trip to San Francisco for months. At 67, I didn't travel as much as I used to, especially since Robert passed 3 years ago. The arthritis in my hands had been acting up lately, making even simple tasks like typing feel more laborious than they used to be. A 5-day getaway with my friend Dorothy and the other ladies from the center seemed like exactly what I needed. David, my 42-year-old son, had stopped by the night before my departure with his wife Lisa and my grandchildren, Emma and Lucas. We shared dinner on my back patio, the kids chattering excitedly about their upcoming school Halloween party, while Lisa helped clear the dish. She'd been unusually attentive lately, asking detailed questions about my daily routines, my banking habits, even which websites I visited most frequently. "Mom, you really should update your computer security," David had said as we watched the kids play in my backyard. "Lisa mentioned you're still using some pretty old passwords. Maybe she could help you set up something more secure while you're gone." Lisa worked at Riverside Community Bank until recently, when they'd let her go due to what they called restructuring. She'd been job hunting for 2 months now, and I could see the stress it was putting on their family. David's marketing job paid well enough, but they'd been stretched thin since buying their townhouse last year. I'd helped with the down payment. "Of course, that's what mothers do." "I appreciate the concern, sweetheart," I'd replied, watching 8-year-old Emma push 10-year-old Lucas on the old swing. "Robert had hung from our oak tree years ago. But I'm pretty careful about these things. Your father taught me well about keeping important information secure." Lisa had smiled that tight smile she sometimes wore when money or security was mentioned. "Of course, Margaret. I just worry about elderly people being targeted by scammers these days. The bank sees it all the time." I'd bristled slightly at being called elderly, though I suppose at 67 the description wasn't entirely inaccurate. Still, I'd been managing my own affairs quite capably since Robert's death. Thank you very much. His financial planning had left me more than comfortable, between his teacher's pension, our investments, and the other arrangements he'd made that I rarely discussed with anyone. The morning of my departure, I double-checked that all my important documents were secure in Robert's old filing cabinet, locked away in our home office. I'd written down my emergency contact information for David, kissed the grandchildren goodbye, and climbed into Dorothy's sensible Honda Civic for the drive to the senior center where our tour bus waited. San Francisco had been wonderful. We'd visited Alcatraz, walked through Chinatown, and spent an entire afternoon at the Dai Young Museum. Dorothy and I had shared a room at a charming boutique hotel in Union Square, staying up too late each night gossiping about the other trip participants, and planning what we'd see the next day. For 5 days I'd felt like my old self again, not the slightly fragile widow that everyone seemed to think I'd become. The problems began before I even reached my front door. I'd tried calling David from the road to let him know I was back safely, but his phone went straight to voicemail. That wasn't unusual. His marketing firm kept him busy with client calls and meetings. I'd tried Lisa next, thinking she might be home with the kids, but her phone rang and rang without answer. I pulled into my driveway at 6:15 in the evening, noting that my neighbor Frank Moretti was working in his garden next door. Frank was 74 and had lived on our street longer than anyone. He waved as I got out of my car, then approached with the slightly concerned expression he wore when something was bothering him. "Margaret, "Welcome back," he said, wiping his hands on a garden towel. "Good trip? Wonderful. Thank you. Is everything all right, Frank? You look worried." He glanced toward my house, then back at me. "Well, I don't want to be the nosy neighbor, but I noticed quite a bit of activity while you were gone. David and Lisa were here every day, sometimes for hours. Yesterday they had some kind of delivery truck, brought in boxes and equipment. I just wanted to make sure you'd asked them to do whatever they were doing." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm October evening. "What kind of equipment?" "Computer stuff. Looked like." And I saw Lisa carrying out a bag of what looked like papers from your office window. Could have been nothing, but you know how these old eyes notice everything. I thanked Frank and hurried toward my front door, my mind racing. David had a key to my house, of course, and I'd never minded him checking on things while I was away. But boxes and equipment? Papers from my that didn't sound like a routine security check. The first thing I noticed upon entering was the smell. My house usually carried the faint scent of the lavender sachets I kept in my linen closets, mixed with whatever I'd been cooking most recently. Instead, there was an antiseptic smell, like cleaning supplies used in excess. Everything looked normal at first glance. The living room furniture was in its usual positions. My collection of ceramic birds still lined the mantelpiece, and Robert's reading chair sat in its customary spot by the window. But as I moved through the house, subtle differences became apparent. The mail on my kitchen counter had been sorted and stacked in a way I never would have done. The coffee maker had been moved 3 inches to the left of its usual position. The kitchen window blinds were closed, though I always left them open to let in natural light. I set my suitcase down and went directly to my home office, a small room off the main hallway that Robert had set up for managing our finances and where I'd continued handling my affairs after his death. The moment I flipped on the light switch, I knew something was very wrong. My computer, which I'd left properly shut down on a clean desk, was running with an unfamiliar screensaver. The desk itself had been rearranged. Papers I'd left in neat stacks were gone entirely. The filing cabinet where I kept important documents appeared untouched, but when I tried the handle, I discovered it had been locked with a different lock than the one I'd installed. My hands trembling slightly, I sat down at my computer and moved the mouse to wake up the screen. Instead of my familiar desktop wallpaper, a photo of a tropical beach I'd never seen before filled the monitor. When I tried to access my email, the system prompted me for a password I didn't recognize. I tried my usual password, the one I'd been using for years. Invalid. I tried the backup password Robert had helped me set up. Invalid. I tried variations, different capitalizations, anything I could think of. Nothing worked. Panic began to set in as I realized the scope of what appeared to have happened. I tried to access my online banking through the browser, but discovered that even my saved passwords had been changed or deleted. Every financial website I attempted to visit requested new login credentials that I no longer possessed. My phone rang, startling me from my growing dread. The caller ID showed David's number. "Mom, you're back. How was San Francisco?" "David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to come over here right away. Something's happened to my computer, and I can't access any of my accounts." There was a pause that lasted just a moment too long. "Oh, that's right. Lisa upgraded your security while you were gone. She was worried about those cyber attacks targeting seniors that have been in the news. Didn't she call to tell you the new passwords?" "No, she didn't call me. I didn't ask her to change anything." "David, I can't get into my own email or banking accounts. This is a serious problem." Another pause. "I'm sure it's just a miscommunication, Mom. Lisa's really good with computer security. She was just trying to help. We'll be over in a few minutes to sort everything out." He hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting in my violated office, staring at a computer screen I no longer controlled. I tried calling Dorothy, thinking she might have some advice, but realized I couldn't access my contact list because it was stored in my now inaccessible email account. 20 minutes later, I heard David's car in the driveway. Through my office window, I watched him and Lisa approach the front door. Lisa was carrying a manila folder thick with papers, and her expression was one I'd never seen before. It wasn't the slightly deferential look she usually wore around me, her husband's mother. This was the confident expression of someone who believed they held all the cards. They used David's key to enter without knocking, calling out greetings as they made their way to the office, where I waited. David looked genuinely concerned, but Lisa's demeanor was all business. "Margaret, we need to talk," Lisa said, settling into the chair across from my desk as if she belonged there. "Your financial security was at serious risk. The passwords you were using were completely inadequate. Any amateur hacker could have cleaned out your account." "Lisa, I didn't ask you to change my passwords. In fact, I specifically told David I didn't want any changes made while I was gone." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, Lisa discovered some suspicious activity on your accounts while she was checking on the house. Someone had been trying to access your banking information. She had to act quickly to protect you." "What suspicious activity, and how was she checking my accounts in the first place?" Lisa opened her folder and extracted several printed pages. "I'll be happy to show you, but first, we need to address the bigger issue. Margaret, your spending patterns over the past year have been erratic and concerning. Large cash withdrawals, transfers to accounts we can't trace, payments to organizations that might not be legitimate. We think someone has been taking advantage of you." I stared at her, my mouth falling open slightly. "Taking advantage of me?" "Lisa, those are my accounts, my money, and my business. I don't need to explain my financial decisions to you or anyone else." "Actually," she said, pulling out another document, "you do. David and I have been consulting with an elder care attorney about getting conservatorship to protect your assets. Your judgment appears to be compromised, possibly due to the early stages of cognitive decline." The words hit me like a physical blow. Cognitive decline, conservatorship. I looked at David, expecting him to contradict his wife's outrageous statements, but he was staring at his hands. "David, surely you don't believe this nonsense." He looked up, his expression pained. "Mom, you have been more forgetful lately. Last month you called me 3 times in one day, asking the same question about Emma's soccer schedule, and Lisa found some really concerning financial records, payments to offshore accounts that you can't explain." My blood turned to ice. Offshore accounts. Lisa had somehow discovered Robert's carefully constructed financial arrangements, the ones he'd set up to protect our assets and minimize tax obligations. The ones I'd never mentioned to David because Robert had always insisted that the fewer people who knew about offshore banking, the safer those assets would be. "I don't know what records you think you found," I said carefully, "but I can explain every financial decision I've made." Lisa smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I'm sure you think you can, but the fact remains that you've lost control of your digital security, you're making questionable financial choices, and you're clearly not capable of managing your affairs safely anymore. That's why we've taken steps to protect you." "What steps?" David finally spoke up. "We've set up new accounts for your day-to-day expenses. Lisa will manage your bill payments and make sure everything gets handled properly. You'll have access to everything you need for groceries, medication, reasonable household expenses." "Reasonable household expenses?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This is my house, my money, and my life. You have no right to manage anything for me." "Actually, we do," Lisa said, extracting yet another document from her folder. "This is a financial power of attorney that you signed last month. You probably don't remember given your memory issues, but it gives David legal authority to make decisions about your finances when you're unable to do so yourself." She handed me a document that looked official, complete with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. But as I studied it, I realized I'd never seen this paper before in my life. The signature looked similar to mine, but the small flourish I always added to the G in Margaret was missing, and the date indicated I'd signed it while I was having lunch with Dorothy at our favorite restaurant. "I never signed this," I said firmly. "This is not my signature, and I was nowhere near a notary on this date." Lisa's expression didn't change. "Memory issues can be very confusing, Margaret, but the document is properly notarized and legally binding. We're just trying to protect you from making financial mistakes that could leave you vulnerable." I looked at David again, searching his face for any sign that he recognized how wrong this was. David, you know me better than anyone. Do you really think I'm incapable of managing my own affair? He looked miserable, but his voice was firm when he answered, Mom, I think you need help. Lisa's explained how easy it is for seniors to be taken advantage of, especially online. This way you'll be protected from scammers and your money will be safe. Safe from scammers, or safe from... Lisa stood up, gathering her papers. We've changed all your passwords to military-grade security standards. I'll give you access to a checking account with enough money for your daily needs. Your social security and pension will be deposited automatically, and all your bills will be paid on time. You don't need to worry about any of it anymore. And if I want to make a large purchase, if I want to travel, or help someone, or donate to charity, you'll discuss it with us first. If it's reasonable and fits your budget, we'll approve it. The word approve echoed in my head like a slap. I would need approval to spend my own money, approval from my son and his wife, who were apparently convinced I was losing my mental faculties. I want you both to leave, I said quietly. Now, David started to protest. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to help you. If you want to help me, give me back my passwords and get out of my house. Lisa shook her head. We can't do that, Margaret. It's for your own protection. But here's your new debit card for the household account, and I've written down the PIN for you. She placed a bank card and small piece of paper on my desk. There's $500 available for this week's expenses. $500 for a week's expense. I typically spent more than that on groceries alone, not to mention gas, medications and the little extras that made life pleasant. They were putting me on an allowance like a child. After they left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the foreign desktop wallpaper and trying to process what had just happened. My own son believed I was losing my mind. His wife had somehow gained access to my financial information and convinced him that I needed to be managed like an incompetent elderly person. They'd forged my signature on legal documents and taken control of my account. But as the initial shock wore off, another emotion began to take its place. Robert had always said that in any conflict, information was power, and Lisa, for all her banking experience and apparent cunning, didn't have all the information. She didn't know about the Cayman Islands account. She didn't know about the Swiss safety deposit box. She didn't know that Robert had taught me more about asset protection than any small-town bank teller could imagine. And most importantly, she didn't know that some passwords couldn't be changed by anyone except the rightful account holder, especially when those accounts were protected by international banking privacy laws and required in-person verification for any modification. I picked up my phone and dialed Dorothy's number from memory. When she answered, I could hear the concern in her voice immediately. Maggie, you sound terrible. What's wrong? I need your help. Can you come over and bring your nephew Kevin if he's available? I think I'm going to need someone who understands computers. Of course, honey. Kevin's having dinner with me tonight anyway. We'll be right over. Are you in some kind of trouble? I looked around my violated office, at the computer I could no longer access and the folder of forged documents Lisa had left behind. I'm in exactly the kind of trouble Robert prepared me for, I said. And tomorrow I'm going to start showing David and Lisa what happens when you underestimate a woman who's been planning for contingencies longer than they've been married. Dorothy arrived within 30 minutes, bringing her nephew Kevin and a thermos of coffee that she knew I'd need. At 28, Kevin worked as an IT consultant for several businesses in Riverside, and I'd watched him grow from a curious teenager who fixed neighborhood computers for pocket money into a sharp young professional who understood technology in ways that still amazed me. Aunt Dot filled me in on the basics during the drive over, Kevin said as they settled into my living room. Someone changed your passwords and is claiming it's for your protection. I explained everything that had happened since my return from San Francisco, showing them the forged power of attorney document, and describing Lisa's claims about my supposed cognitive decline. Kevin examined my computer while Dorothy studied the paperwork with the sharp eye of a retired nurse, who'd spent decades dealing with medical and legal documentation. This is definitely not your signature, Dorothy said, holding the power of attorney up to the light. I've seen your handwriting thousands of times over the past 15 years. Whoever forged this did a decent job, but they missed the little details. You always make that tiny loop in your R and this doesn't have it. Kevin looked up from my computer screen. Miss Chen, the password changes are extensive. They've modified your email, all your saved browser passwords, even your Wi-Fi network. But here's what's interesting. The security settings they've implemented are actually quite sophisticated. This isn't amateur hour. Someone with banking experience definitely did this. Lisa worked at Riverside Community Bank until recently. She'd know exactly how to make these changes look legitimate. The question is, Dorothy said, settling back into Robert's old reading chair, what are we going to do about it? Because you can't let them get away with this, Maggie. If you don't fight back now, they'll completely take over your life. I'd been thinking about exactly that since David and Lisa left. The old Margaret might have accepted their explanations, might have worried that perhaps they were right about her declining abilities, but the Margaret that Robert had trained to think strategically about assets and protection wasn't going to roll over for anyone. Kevin, how difficult would it be to prove that these password changes were made without my consent? He considered this. Not difficult at all. Every password change creates a digital timestamp. If they were changed while you were in San Francisco, and we can prove you were there, that's pretty clear evidence of unauthorized access. Plus, most systems keep logs of when and where password changes originate. If they were made from your son's house or Lisa's computer, we'd have proof. What about the financial accounts? Can you help me figure out what they've done to those? That's trickier. Banking systems have stronger security protection. But if you can remember any of your original passwords or security questions, I might be able to help you regain access to some accounts. I smiled for the first time since returning home. Kevin, I may be 67, but I'm not completely helpless. I remember every password Robert and I ever created. The question is whether Lisa was thorough enough to change the ones she doesn't know about. Over the next 2 hours, Kevin worked methodically through my digital life. We discovered that Lisa had indeed been thorough with the obvious accounts, my primary email, the local bank accounts that appeared on my statements, the investment accounts managed by our financial advisor. But Robert had taught me to think in layers, and some layers weren't visible to someone doing a surface-level investigation. My secondary email account, the one I used primarily for online shopping and newsletter subscriptions, had been untouched. Lisa apparently didn't know it existed. Through that account, Kevin was able to help me access several other systems that used it as a backup recovery method. More importantly, when I directed Kevin to a specific secure website with a URL that looked like random letters and numbers, his eyes widened as the login screen appeared. Miss Chen, this is a private banking portal. This is serious offshore banking infrastructure. Robert was a very thorough man, I said quietly. He believed in multiple layers of protection for everything important. Some of those layers weren't obvious to casual observation. The Cayman Islands accounts were exactly as Robert had left them, protected by banking privacy laws and security protocols that required physical presence for any major changes. Lisa couldn't access them because she didn't know they existed, couldn't change the passwords because the bank required in-person verification for security modifications, and couldn't even discover them because they didn't appear on any domestic financial statement. How much are we talking about here? Dorothy asked quietly. I showed her the balance on the primary account. She nearly dropped her coffee cup. Maggie, that's more money than most people see in a lifetime. Why didn't you ever mention that? Because Robert taught me that the best security is invisibility. The fewer people who know about assets, the safer those assets remain. I never told David, because I wanted him to build his own life, make his own success. I planned to tell him eventually, maybe when I got older and needed help. I never imagined he'd try to take control of my finances based on his wife's manipulation. Kevin was studying the account interface with professional interest. This is incredibly sophisticated, military-grade encryption, biometric verification requirements. Even if someone knew these accounts existed, they'd need your physical presence, palm print, and voice verification to make any changes. Robert was paranoid about security in the best possible way. He said that if we ever needed these accounts, it would be because something had gone very wrong with our visible assets. I'd say this qualifies. Dorothy leaned forward. So what's the plan, Meg? You've got access to funds they don't know about. proof that they've been manipulating your accounts without permission, and evidence of forged documents. How do we use that? I'd been formulating a strategy since Kevin confirmed what I'd hoped. Lisa and David thought they held all the cards because they controlled my visible financial life. They had no idea that the visible accounts represented less than 40% of my actual assets. First, we document everything. Kevin, can you help me create a record of all the unauthorized changes to my accounts? Absolutely. I'll create a comprehensive report with timestamps, IP addresses, everything. It'll be clear evidence of unauthorized access. Second, I need to contact my real attorney. Not the elder care lawyer Lisa claims to have consulted, but James Rodriguez, who's been handling my affairs since Robert's death. He needs to know about the forged power of attorney, and what they're trying to do. Smart, Dorothy said. James is sharp. He'll know exactly how to handle this legally. Third, and this is where it gets interesting, I'm going to let them think their plan is working. I'll use the debit card Lisa gave me, act like the confused elderly woman they apparently think I am, and let them believe they're in control. Meanwhile, I'll be working behind the scenes to gather evidence and prepare my counterattack. Kevin grinned. A classic information warfare strategy. Let the enemy think they're winning while you prepare to destroy them. Exactly, but I need to be careful. David is still my son, and Emma and Lucas are still my grandchildren. I don't want to destroy my family relationships if there's a way to salvage them. I need to find out how much of this is Lisa's manipulation, and how much is David's genuine belief that I need protection. Dorothy reached over and squeezed my hand. Honey, from what you've told me, David is being manipulated just as much as you are. Lisa's convinced him that you're losing your mind, so he'll go along with her plan. Once he sees the truth, hopefully he'll come to his senses. Over the next hour we developed a detailed plan. Kevin would create comprehensive documentation of the unauthorized account access, and help me maintain secure communication channels that Lisa couldn't monitor. Dorothy would serve as my witness and support system, making sure I wasn't isolated while I appeared to comply with Lisa's restrictions, and I would begin carefully gathering evidence of their deception while appearing to accept my new limitation. There's one more thing, I said as we wrapped up our planning session. I want to understand exactly what Lisa's endgame is. She's not doing this just to protect me from scammers. There's a financial motive here, and I need to know what it is. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Kevin nodded. I can help with that too. If you can get me access to David's computer or Lisa's phone for just a few minutes, I can install monitoring software that will let us see their communications. It's legally questionable, but given that they've committed identity theft and forgery, I'd say you have justification. Let's see what we can discover through legitimate means first, but keep that option available if we need it. After Dorothy and Kevin left, I sat in my office and opened a new document on my computer. Using my restored secondary email account, I began documenting everything that had happened since my return from San Francisco. Every conversation, every document Lisa had shown me, every change they'd made to my digital life. If this ended up in court, I wanted perfect record. I also composed a carefully worded email to James Rodriguez, my attorney, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss unauthorized changes to my financial accounts and a potentially forged power of attorney document. I scheduled the message to be sent first thing Monday morning, giving me the weekend to gather additional evidence. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. Every shadow looked suspicious. I kept thinking about the violation of having someone else's hands on my personal information, someone else making decisions about my money and my life. But underneath the anger and hurt, there was something else growing. Determination. Robert hadn't spent years teaching me about asset protection and strategic thinking just to have me surrender to the first challenge that came along. Saturday morning, I decided to test the boundaries of my new restriction. I drove to Riverside Community Bank, the branch where Lisa had worked, and attempted to access my primary checking account. The teller, a young woman I didn't recognize, was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, Ms. Chen, but there's a notation on your account that all transactions over $50 require secondary authorization." I'll need to call the authorized contact for approval. I'm the account holder, I said calmly. This is my money. I understand, ma'am. But the system shows that Miss David Chen has been designated as the financial manager for this account due to documented cognitive concerns. It's for your protection. Documented cognitive concerns. Lisa had been thorough indeed, creating an official record at the bank, where she'd worked that would support their narrative of my declining mental capacity. Could I speak with your manager, please? Patricia Anderson emerged from her office a few minutes later, a woman in her mid-40s with the professional demeanor of someone who'd dealt with difficult situations before. She recognized me immediately. Mrs. Chen, it's good to see you again. How can I help you today? Patricia, I need to understand exactly what changes have been made to my accounts. I was away for 5 days, and when I returned, I discovered that my son and daughter-in-law had made modifications without my knowledge or consent. Her expression grew cautious. Well, the changes were made by Lisa Chen, who presented proper power of attorney documentation and explained that you were experiencing some cognitive difficulties that made it necessary to protect your assets. May I see that power of attorney documentation? Of course. She retrieved a file and showed me a copy of the same forged document Lisa had presented at my house. But there was additional paperwork I hadn't seen before, a medical assessment form, claiming I'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Patricia, I've never been diagnosed with dementia. I've never even been evaluated for dementia. This medical assessment is fraudulent. She looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen, I have to tell you that Lisa was very convincing. She seemed genuinely concerned about your welfare, and she had all the proper documentation. If there's been some mistake, there's been more than a mistake, there's been fraud, and I'll need copies of all these documents for my attorney. Patricia agreed to provide copies, but I could see she was torn between her professional obligations and her growing suspicion that something wasn't right. As she prepared the paperwork, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Chen, I should probably tell you that Lisa asked about your offshore banking relationships. She said she needed to consolidate all your accounts for better management. I told her we didn't have records of any offshore accounts, but she seemed quite interested in the topic. So Lisa suspected there were hidden assets. She was fishing for information about accounts she couldn't find, trying to determine if there were funds beyond her reach. That explained why she'd been so thorough in restricting my access to everything else. She wanted to flush out any hidden resources by making me desperate enough to reveal them. What exactly did you tell her? Nothing specific, because we truly don't have records of offshore banking relationships. But I did mention that many of our wealthier clients maintain international accounts for tax and estate planning purposes. She asked if there was a way to track such accounts, and I explained that domestic banks generally don't have visibility into offshore holdings unless the customer voluntarily provides that information. Perfect. Lisa knew offshore accounts were a possibility, but she had no way to find them or access them. That gave me a significant advantage, but it also meant I needed to be very careful. If she became desperate enough, she might escalate her tactic. I spent Saturday afternoon visiting other locations where Lisa might have made changes. At my credit union, I discovered she'd attempted to add herself as an authorized user on my credit card, but had been denied because she didn't have the proper identification document. At my investment advisor's office, I learned that she'd called asking about my portfolio but had been told that information could only be shared with me directly. Lisa had been systematic, but she'd also been limited by legal and procedural safeguards that prevented her from accessing everything. The forged power of attorney had worked at the bank where she'd had inside knowledge and relationships, but it hadn't been sufficient everywhere else. Sunday evening, David called to check on how I was adapting to my new financial arrangement. Mom, Lisa wanted me to ask if you've had any problems with the debit card or if you need help with anything. The card works fine, sweetheart. I bought groceries and picked up my prescriptions. $500 doesn't go as far as it used to, but I'm managing. Lisa told you it would be easier not to worry about managing all those accounts yourself. She's really good at this stuff. I bit my tongue to keep from telling him exactly what I thought about Lisa's expertise. David, can I ask you something? Do you really believe I'm losing my mental capacity? There was a long pause. Mom, You have seemed more forgetful lately, and some of the financial decisions you've made recently. Lisa explained how easy it is for people to be taken advantage of when they get older. She's just trying to protect you. What financial decisions are you referring to? Well, like those large cash withdrawals you've been making. Lisa said they could be signs that someone is pressuring you to give them money, and apparently there were some suspicious transfers to accounts she couldn't identify. I realized that Lisa had spun my completely legitimate financial activities into evidence of exploitation or cognitive decline. The cash withdrawals were for my monthly donations to the senior center, and occasional gifts to my grandchildren. The transfers to unidentified accounts were my regular contributions to my offshore savings, which Lisa couldn't trace because she didn't know they existed. David, those transactions were all legitimate. I can explain every single one if you'd like. Mom, that's exactly what Lisa said you'd say. She said people in your situation often don't realize they're being manipulated because the manipulation is gradual and sophisticated. It was masterful, really. Lisa had created a narrative where any protest on my part would be interpreted as further evidence of my compromised judgment. If I claimed my financial decisions were legitimate, that proved I was being manipulated. If I insisted I was mentally competent, that proved I wasn't. I'd like to schedule a proper medical evaluation, I said carefully. If there are concerns about my cognitive abilities, I should be assessed by a qualified professional. That's a great idea, Mom. Lisa has already researched some excellent geriatric specialists. She'll set up an appointment for you this week. Of course she would. Lisa would choose a doctor she could manipulate, just as she'd manipulated the bank documentation. But the suggestion gave me an idea. Actually, David, I'd prefer to be evaluated by my own doctor. Harrison has been treating me for 15 years. He knows my medical history and my normal cognitive baseline better than anyone. Another pause. Well, we'll discuss it with Lisa. She might have some concerns about Dr. Harrison's objectivity since he's been your doctor for so long. Lisa would indeed have concerns about Dr. Harrison's objectivity, because Dr. Harrison would find absolutely nothing wrong with my cognitive abilities. A truly independent evaluation would destroy her carefully constructed narrative. After hanging up with David, I sat in my living room and thought about the conversation. My son wasn't evil or malicious. He was genuinely concerned about my welfare and had been convinced by someone he trusted that I needed protection. The tragedy was that his desire to help me was being used as a weapon against me. But Lisa was a different story entirely. She had systematically planned this takeover, forging documents, manipulating bank relationships, and constructing a narrative of my incompetence that would justify her control. She wasn't protecting me from financial exploitation. She was the financial exploitation. I spent Sunday evening reviewing Robert's notes about the offshore accounts, refreshing my memory about access procedures and security protocols. If Lisa escalated her tactics, I needed to be prepared to use every tool at my disposal. Robert had always said that the best defense was being prepared for war while hoping for peace. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. I had an attorney to contact, evidence to present, and a battle to plan. Lisa might have thought she'd won by gaining control of my visible assets, but she was about to learn that some fortresses have walls she couldn't even see. Monday morning arrived with the crisp October air that reminded me why I loved living in Riverside. I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to important meetings with Robert's business associates, and arrived at James Rodriguez's law office 30 minutes early. The receptionist recognized me immediately and ushered me into his conference room with the kind of concerned efficiency that told me she'd read the urgency in my email. James entered precisely at 9 o'clock, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the expression of a man who'd already reviewed whatever preliminary research his staff had conducted based on my message. At 52, he'd been practicing elder law for over 20 years, and his reputation for protecting seniors from financial abuse was exactly why Robert had chosen him to handle our estate planning. Margaret, I have to say your email concerned me greatly. Before we discuss the details, I want you to know that if what you've described is accurate, we're dealing with serious criminal activity, not just family drama. I handed him the folder I'd prepared over the weekend, containing copies of the forged power of attorney, the fraudulent medical assessment, documentation of the unauthorized password changes, and Kevin's preliminary report on the digital intrusion. James studied each document carefully, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. When he reached Kevin's technical report, his eyebrows rose significantly. "This is remarkably thorough documentation. Your friend's nephew has provided exactly the kind of evidence we'd need to prove unauthorized access. The timestamps alone are damning. Every single password change occurred while you were verifiably in San Francisco." "James, I need to understand what legal options I have, but I also need to be strategic about how we proceed. David is still my son, and I don't want to destroy my relationship with my grandchildren if there's a way to resolve this that preserves our family." He set down the documents and looked at me directly. "Margaret, I appreciate your desire to protect your family relationships, but you need to understand the gravity of what's happened here. Identity theft, forgery, unauthorized access to financial accounts, fraudulent medical documentation. These are felonies. Lisa could face serious prison time. What about David? How much legal jeopardy is he in? That depends on how much he knew about the fraudulent aspects of Lisa's action. If he genuinely believed the power of attorney was legitimate, and that you had cognitive issues, he might be considered a victim of Lisa's manipulation rather than a co-conspirator. But if he knowingly participated in the forgery or the unauthorized account access, he could face charges as well. This was exactly what I'd feared. My desire to protect David was complicated by the reality that he might have crossed legal lines, even if he thought he was helping me. "What's our first step?" James opened his calendar. "We file a police report immediately. Financial elder abuse is taken very seriously in California, and the sooner we get law enforcement involved, the stronger our case becomes. We also file for an emergency injunction to freeze any accounts they've modified, and to invalidate the forged power of attorney." "How quickly can we move on this?" "The police report we can file today. The injunction hearing I can get scheduled for Thursday, possibly Wednesday if we push hard. But Margaret, once we start this process, there's no going back quiet. This becomes a public legal matter, and your family relationships will be permanently changed." I thought about Emma and Lucas, about David's confused loyalty to his wife, about the possibility that Lisa might escalate her tactics if she felt cornered. But I also thought about Robert's voice in my head, reminding me that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, regardless of the personal cost. "Let's proceed, but I want to try one thing first. I want to confront Lisa directly, with you present as a witness, and give her a chance to reverse what she's done voluntarily. If she refuses or tries to dig in deeper, then we go nuclear." James considered this. "It's risky. Confronting her directly could prompt her to destroy evidence or transfer assets. But if you're determined to try salvaging the family relationship, I understand the impulse. We'd need to be very careful about how we approach it." We spent the next hour crafting a strategy. James would call Lisa and David that afternoon, requesting a meeting to discuss concerns about the recent changes to Margaret's financial arrangement. He would not mention the criminal aspects or reveal how much evidence we'd gathered, but he would make it clear that I had serious legal representation and that they needed to take this meeting seriously. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday morning at James's office. That gave me 2 days to gather any additional evidence and to prepare for what might be my last chance to resolve this without destroying my family. I spent Monday afternoon visiting Dr. Harrison for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. At 73, Dr. Harrison had been practicing internal medicine longer than most of his colleagues had been alive, and his reputation for thoroughness was legendary. I explained the situation without mentioning names, simply saying that family members had expressed concerns about my mental capacity. "Margaret, in the 15 years I've been your physician, I've never observed any signs of cognitive decline. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sharp, and your decision-making abilities are completely intact. But let's do a formal evaluation, so we have documented proof." The evaluation took 2 hours and included memory tests, reasoning puzzles, medical history review, and a complete physical examination. Dr. Harrison's final assessment was unequivocal. I was in excellent mental health with no signs of cognitive impairment. dementia, or any condition that would affect my ability to manage my own affairs. I'll have the written report ready by tomorrow afternoon, he said as I prepared to leave. Margaret, if someone is claiming you're mentally incompetent, they're either seriously mistaken or deliberately lying. Based on this evaluation, you're sharper than most people half your age. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected development. Patricia Anderson from Riverside Community Bank called to request a meeting. Mrs. Chen, I've been reviewing the documentation Lisa provided when she made changes to your accounts, and I have some concerns. Could you come in this afternoon? I'd like to discuss this matter with you privately. I arrived at the bank to find Patricia waiting with a folder thick with papers and a worried expression. Mrs. Chen, I owe you an apology. After our conversation on Saturday, I decided to investigate the medical assessment form Lisa provided. I called the doctor's office listed on the document, and they have no record of you ever being a patient there. In fact, they've never heard of you. She handed me a copy of the fraudulent medical form. Furthermore, I contacted our corporate security department about the power of attorney documentation. They ran it through their fraud detection protocols, and several elements raised red flags. The notary seal doesn't match any authorized notaries in our database, and the paper stock is different from what legitimate legal offices in this area typically use. What does this mean for my account? It means we've been the victims of a sophisticated fraud, and I'm deeply sorry we didn't catch it immediately. We're reversing all the changes Lisa made to your accounts, and we're filing our own reports with both law enforcement and our corporate fraud division. Patricia explained that the bank's investigation had revealed that Lisa had used her knowledge of their internal procedures to circumvent normal security protocol. She'd presented the fraudulent documents during a shift change, when the regular managers weren't available, and she'd used banking terminology and procedures that made her requests seem routine rather than suspicious. The good news is that we can restore your full account access immediately. The bad news is that this represents a serious breach of banking security protocols, and our corporate legal department will likely pursue criminal charges against Lisa regardless of what you decide to do personally. I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness as I watched Patricia restore my account access. The vindication was obvious. Here was proof that Lisa's actions were fraudulent and that my mental capacity wasn't in question. The sadness came from realizing that the situation had escalated beyond the point where a simple family conversation could resolve it. That evening I received a call from David that confirmed my fear. Mom, I just got a call from some attorney named Rodriguez, saying he represents you and wants to meet with us tomorrow. What's this about? I thought we had everything worked out with the account management. David, I need you to understand that I never agreed to have my accounts managed by anyone. I never signed a power of attorney, and I never authorized Lisa to change my passwords or restrict my access to my own money. Mom, we've been through this. You did sign the power of attorney. Lisa showed us the document. David, that document is forged. Dr. Harrison evaluated me yesterday and found no cognitive impairment whatsoever. The medical assessment Lisa provided to the bank is also fraudulent. I've never even been to that doctor's office. There was a long silence. That's impossible. Lisa wouldn't forge documents. She's trying to help you. Then prove it. Come to the meeting tomorrow, and let's examine all the evidence together. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize and accept whatever arrangements you think are best. If I'm right, then we need to discuss how this happened and how to fix it. Another pause. Fine, we'll be there. But Mom, this is really hurtful. Lisa has been working so hard to protect you, and now you're accusing her of crimes. I'm not accusing anyone of anything yet. I'm asking for the truth. After hanging up, I called Dorothy to update her on the developments. She was simultaneously relieved that the bank had validated my concerns and worried about what tomorrow's meeting might reveal. Maggie, what if David was more involved in this than you think? What if he knew about the forged documents? Then I'll deal with that when I have to. But I still believe David thought he was doing the right thing. Lisa is sophisticated enough to have convinced him that all her actions were legitimate. And if she refuses to back down tomorrow, then James files the criminal charges, and we let the legal system sort it out. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove to James's office. I arrived early and spent a few minutes reviewing the evidence folder one more time, steeling myself for what might be a very difficult conversation. David and Lisa arrived precisely on time, both dressed formally, and wearing expressions that suggested they viewed this meeting as an annoyance, rather than a serious legal matter. Lisa carried her own folder of documents, and her confidence seemed unshaken by the prospect of facing an attorney. James began the meeting with professional courtesy, explaining his role as my legal representative, and outlining the concerns that had prompted this gathering. He presented our evidence methodically, starting with the timeline of password changes that occurred while I was in San Francisco and proceeding through the various fraudulent documents. David's expression grew increasingly troubled as James explained each piece of evidence, but Lisa remained composed, occasionally taking notes and showing no sign of surprise or concern. "Mr. Rodriguez," Lisa said when James finished his presentation, "I appreciate your thoroughness, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Every action I took was legally authorized and medically necessary. Margaret's cognitive decline has been gradual but unmistakable, and David and I were simply trying to protect her assets from further mismanagement." James handed her a copy of Dr. Harrison's evaluation. This comprehensive cognitive assessment was completed 2 days ago by Ms. Chen's longtime physician. It shows no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. Lisa studied the document, and for the first time, her composure cracked slightly. "One doctor's opinion isn't definitive. Cognitive decline can be intermittent and difficult to detect." "What about the forged power of attorney?" James asked. "The bank's fraud investigation has confirmed that the notary seal is fraudulent, and that Mrs. Chen was never a patient at the medical office listed on your documentation." David turned to stare at Lisa, his face pale. "Lisa, what is he talking about? You told me Mom signed those papers." "She did sign them," Lisa said quickly. "She probably doesn't remember because of her memory issues, and I have no idea why the bank thinks there's a problem with the notarization. Everything was done properly." James placed a side-by-side comparison of my real signature and the forged signature on the table. "Mrs. Chen, would you sign your name on this blank paper so we can see your current signature?" I signed my name with the same flourishes and loops I'd been using for decades. The difference between my real signature and the one on the power of attorney was obvious to everyone in the room. David was staring at the comparison with growing horror. "Lisa, that's not Mom's signature. Look at the differences. You told me you watched her sign them." "Memory issues can affect fine motor control," Lisa said, but her voice was less confident now. "The signature might look different because of her condition." "What condition?" I asked quietly. "Lisa, you've claimed I have cognitive decline, but you've never provided any actual medical evidence of this supposed condition. Dr. Harrison has been treating me for 15 years, and he's found no signs of mental impairment. Dr. Harrison is too close to the situation to be objective. You need evaluation by a geriatric specialist." James leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, we also need to address the matter of the unauthorized access to Mrs. Chen's digital account. Our IT investigation shows that every password change was made from an IP address registered to your home internet connection." Lisa's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. "I was protecting her. Do you have any idea how vulnerable elderly people are to online scams? I prevented her from being victimized by criminals." "By committing identity theft yourself?" James asked. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Lisa, did you forge Mom's signature? Did you change her passwords without her permission?" Lisa looked between David and James, clearly calculating her options. "Everything I did was to protect your mother's assets. She was making questionable financial decisions, and I prevented her from losing everything to scammers." "That's not an answer," David said, his voice rising. "Did you forge her signature or not? The power of attorney reflects her intentions even if the technical execution wasn't perfect. She wanted protection from financial exploitation." "No," I said firmly. "I never wanted anyone else to control my finance. I never asked for your help, never authorized these changes, and never signed any documents giving you authority over my accounts." David was staring at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of betrayal
anger, and dawning comprehension. Lisa, you lied to me. You told me Mom signed those papers. You told me she was losing her memory. You convinced me that we needed to protect her. I was protecting both of you. Margaret was about to make financial mistakes that would have cost her everything, and you were too trusting to see the warning sign. What warning signs? David demanded. What financial mistakes? Lisa hesitated, realizing she'd backed herself into a corner. The large cash withdrawals, the transfers to unknown accounts, the susceptibility to telephone scams. What transfers to unknown accounts? James asked.
There were regular transfers that Margaret couldn't explain properly. Money disappearing into accounts that weren't listed on her bank statements. I realized Lisa was referring to my offshore contributions, the legitimate transfers that she couldn't trace because the accounts were protected by international banking privacy laws. Lisa, I said carefully, those transfers were to my personal savings account, perfectly legitimate transactions that are none of your business. What savings accounts? They weren't on any of the statements I reviewed. And there it was. Lisa had been fishing for hidden assets, just as Patricia at the bank had suspected. She'd used the narrative of protecting me from financial exploitation to justify her own exploration of my complete financial picture. Lisa, David said quietly, exactly what statements did you review? How did you get access to Mom's private financial information? The room fell silent as the full scope of Lisa's invasion of my privacy became clear to everyone present. She'd not only forged documents and stolen my digital identity, but she'd been conducting unauthorized surveillance of my financial life, looking for assets she could control or accounts she could access. James made a note in his file. Chen, I think we've heard enough to understand the situation clearly. Mrs. Chen is prepared to offer you one opportunity to reverse all the changes you've made voluntarily and to acknowledge that your actions were unauthorized. If you're willing to do that, she might consider not pursuing criminal charges. Lisa looked around the room, clearly recognizing that her position had become untenable. But instead of accepting the lifeline James had offered, she made a choice that sealed her fate. I'm not admitting to any wrongdoing, she said, standing up and gathering her papers. Margaret is vulnerable whether she admits it or not, and someone needs to protect her from making catastrophic financial decisions. If you want to pursue this legally, go ahead. I have evidence of her questionable judgment that will support my actions. David remained seated, staring at his wife with undisguised shock. Lisa, what evidence? What are you talking about? Ask your mother about her offshore banking accounts, Lisa said as she moved toward the door. Ask her why she's been hiding money from her own family and making secretive international transfers. If she's so mentally competent, let her explain those transactions. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the three of us in stunned silence. David turned to look at me with confused, hurt eyes. Mom, what is she talking about? Do you have hidden bank accounts? James cleared his throat diplomatically. David, your mother's financial arrangements are her private business. The issue here isn't what accounts she may or may not have, but whether Lisa had any legal authority to access her private financial information or make changes to her accounts. But if Mom has been hiding money… David, I said gently, your father and I made certain financial arrangements for estate planning and tax purposes. Those arrangements are completely legal and legitimate, but they're also private. Lisa had no right to investigate my finances, and she certainly had no right to try to control them. Why didn't you ever tell me about these accounts? I looked at my son, seeing the confusion and hurt in his expression, and realized that Lisa's parting shot had been calculated to create exactly this kind of family discord. Because, sweetheart, your father taught me that the best security is privacy. I planned to discuss our complete financial picture with you when the time was right, but that's very different from having someone steal my financial information and use it to manipulate both of us. James intervened before the conversation could become more contentious. David, the question we need to focus on now is what happens next. Your wife has just admitted to unauthorized access of private financial information and has refused to reverse the fraudulent changes she made to your mother's account. What she did constitutes multiple felonies, regardless of her claimed motivations. David sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything he'd heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I trusted her. She convinced me that Mom was losing her memory, and that we needed to protect her. I never questioned the documents because I thought Lisa knew what she was doing from her banking experience. David, I reached across the table to touch his hand. You were trying to help me. Lisa manipulated your love for me to serve her own purposes. That's not your fault, but I should have questioned it. I should have insisted on getting a second medical opinion, or talked to Dr. Harrison myself. Or, he trailed off, shaking his head. James gave David a few moments to process before continuing. We need to decide how to proceed. Mrs. Chen, do you want to file criminal charge? I looked at my son's devastated expression and thought about my grandchildren, who would have to live with the consequences of whatever decision I made today. I want Lisa to face the legal consequences of her actions, I said finally. But David, I need you to understand that this doesn't change how I feel about you or Emma and Lucas. You're still my family, and I still love you. David nodded, tears in his eyes. What happens now? Now, James said, we file the appropriate criminal charges and civil action. The bank will pursue their own fraud case, and Mrs. Chen will regain complete control of her financial accounts. As for your marriage and custody arrangements, David, those are separate matters you'll need to address with your own attorney. As we left James's office, David walked beside me in silence until we reached our cars. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I let this happen. You let it happen because you love me, and you trusted someone you thought loved me too. Lisa exploited that trust, but that doesn't make you a bad son. What do I tell Emma and Lucas? Tell them that sometimes adults make mistakes, but that families work through problems together. They don't need to know the details right now. David nodded and got into his car. As I watched him drive away, I realized that while I'd won this battle, the war for my family's trust and unity was just beginning. The criminal charges were filed Thursday morning. Detective Sarah Martinez from the Riverside Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit arrived at my house precisely at 10 o'clock, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who'd seen every type of financial fraud imaginable. At 38, she'd built a reputation for thorough investigations and successful prosecutions of elder abuse cases. Mrs. Chen, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence your attorney provided, and I have to say this is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've encountered. Most victims don't have this level of documentation when they report financial crime. We spent 2 hours going through every detail, with Detective Martinez asking probing questions about my relationship with Lisa, the timeline of events, and the specific unauthorized actions that had been taken. She was particularly interested in the forged medical documentation and the systematic nature of the password changes. What concerns me most, she said as she reviewed Kevin's technical report, is how sophisticated this scheme was. Your daughter-in-law didn't just stumble into this fraud. She planned it meticulously, using her banking knowledge to circumvent normal security protocols. Detective Martinez, I need to ask about my son. How much legal jeopardy is he facing? She considered this carefully. Based on what you've told me and the evidence I've reviewed, it appears David was manipulated rather than complicit. However, we'll need to interview him separately to determine his level of knowledge about the fraudulent document. The interview with David took place Friday afternoon at the police station. I wasn't present, but James attended as David's attorney to ensure his rights were protected. According to James, David was completely cooperative, expressing shock and remorse about Lisa's actions, while providing detailed information about how she'd convinced him of my supposed cognitive decline. David passed a polygraph examination voluntarily, James told me afterward. Detective Martinez is satisfied that he was a victim of Lisa's manipulation rather than a knowing participant in the fraud. He won't face criminal charges, though he'll likely need to testify in Lisa's trial. The relief I felt about David's situation was tempered by the realization that Lisa had escalated her tactics since our confrontation at James's office. Friday evening, I discovered that she'd made new attempts to access my financial information, this time targeting institutions she hadn't previously approached. My investment advisor called to report that someone claiming to be my granddaughter had called asking about my portfolio, saying I'd fallen and couldn't speak for myself. The credit reporting agencies had received multiple requests for my credit report from someone using my social security number but providing Lisa's address. Even my insurance company had been contacted by someone claiming to be my daughter-in-law and requesting policy information for estate planning purposes. She's getting desperate, Kevin observed when I called to update him on these new developments. Instead of backing down after being exposed, she's doubling down and trying to access anything she might have missed. What worries me is what she might do if she discovers the offshore accounts, I said. She's already demonstrated that she's willing to commit fraud. If she finds out about the Cayman Islands holdings, she might try to find a way to access those too. Kevin spent Saturday installing additional security monitoring on my computer and phone system. If she tries to access your devices remotely or if anyone attempts to break into your offshore banking portals, we'll know immediately. But Mrs. Chen, those international accounts have security protocols that would be almost impossible for her to breach. Almost impossible, but not entirely impossible. Lisa had already demonstrated capabilities I hadn't expected. The thought of her getting access to Robert's carefully protected assets was enough to keep me awake Saturday night. Sunday brought an unexpected visit. David arrived at my front door with Emma and Lucas, all three looking subdued. The children hugged me with unusual intensity, as if they sensed that something significant was happening in their family even if they didn't understand the details. "Mom, can we David asked as the children went to play in my backyard. "I need to tell you something important." We settled in my living room with coffee while Emma and Lucas played on the swing set that Robert had built years ago. David looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, and the posture of someone carrying a heavy burden. "Lisa moved out yesterday," he said without preamble. "She packed everything while I was at work and left a note saying she needed time to think. She took most of our savings and left me with a house payment I can't afford alone." "David, I'm sorry. I know this is painful, even given everything that's happened." "Mom, there's more. I found some things in her home office after she left. Financial documents, printed emails, notes about your accounts. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer." He handed me a folder containing printouts I'd never seen before. Lisa had been monitoring my spending patterns, tracking my routine transactions, and building detailed profiles of my financial habits. There were notes about my charitable donations, my grocery shopping patterns, even estimates of my utility bill. "She had charts showing your income versus your visible expenses," David continued. "She calculated that there had to be hidden assets, because your lifestyle cost more than your known income sources could support." The documents were disturbing in their thoroughness. Lisa hadn't just stumbled upon an opportunity to exploit me. She'd been conducting systematic surveillance of my financial life, looking for vulnerabilities she could exploit and assets she could access. "David, how long do you think she was planning this?" "Based on the dates on these documents, at least 8 months, maybe longer." "Mom, I think she married me partly to get access to your money." The pain in his voice was heartbreaking. My son was realizing that his marriage might have been built on deception from the beginning, that Lisa's interest in our family had been motivated by financial opportunity rather than love. "There's something else," David said, pulling out another document. "She had a business plan. She was going to use your assets to start an investment company, with herself as the manager. She'd calculated that if she could gain control of your finances, she could use them as seed capital for her own business venture." The business plan was titled Senior Asset Management Solutions, and outlined a scheme for Lisa to become a financial advisor, specializing in managing elderly clients' assets. My money would have been her proof of concept, demonstrating her ability to grow and protect senior investment. "She was going to build a business empire using your identity as the foundation," David said. "Mom, I'm so ashamed that I helped her do this to you." "David, you didn't help her. You were manipulated just as much as I was. She exploited your love for me and your desire to protect me." We spent the afternoon going through Lisa's documents while Emma and Lucas played outside. The more we discovered, the more apparent it became that Lisa's scheme had been far more ambitious than simple identity theft. She'd been planning to systematically exploit elderly clients using the technique she'd perfected on me. There's a list here of other potential targets, David said, showing me a document with names and addresses of senior citizens in our area. She'd been researching other elderly people with substantial assets and limited family oversight. The realization that I might have been Lisa's test case for a larger fraud operation was deeply disturbing. If she'd succeeded with me, how many other families would she have destroyed? Monday morning brought news that the investigation had expanded. Detective Martinez called to inform me that the district attorney's office had decided to pursue multiple felony charges against Lisa, including identity theft, forgery, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Mrs. Chen, we've also discovered that Lisa has been involved in similar activities in other states. The FBI has opened a federal investigation into possible interstate fraud patterns. The FBI involvement meant that Lisa's crimes extended far beyond her actions against my family. She'd apparently been operating across state lines, potentially victimizing elderly people in multiple jurisdictions. Tuesday afternoon, I received a call that changed everything. It was Patricia Anderson from the bank, and her voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. Mrs. Chen, I need you to come to the bank immediately. We've discovered that Lisa made unauthorized access attempts to your offshore account information. I drove to the bank with my heart racing. How could Lisa have accessed offshore account information that wasn't supposed to exist in any domestic banking records? Patricia met me in her office with a grim expression and a computer screen showing transaction logs I didn't recognize. Miss Chen, it appears that Lisa accessed your late husband's old email account somehow. Robert had received electronic statements from your Cayman Islands bank several years ago, before he switched to paper statements for security reasons. Lisa found those old emails and used the account information to attempt unauthorized access to your offshore holdings. The violation felt even more personal than the domestic fraud. Lisa had invaded Robert's private communications, using his own carefully constructed security measures against us. Was she successful in accessing the accounts? No, thankfully. The offshore bank's security protocols prevented any unauthorized access, but she did try multiple times over the past week, using various combinations of personal information she'd gathered about you and Robert. Patricia showed me the attempted access logs. Lisa had tried using Robert's birth date, our anniversary, the children's birthdays, even my maiden name. She'd been systematic and persistent, attempting to crack the security codes that protected our most valuable assets. Miss Chen, there's something else. The offshore bank contacted us directly to report these access attempts. They're very concerned about the security breach and want to speak with you personally. I spent the rest of Tuesday on secure phone calls with representatives from the Cayman Islands Bank. Their security department had detected the unauthorized access attempts and had immediately frozen all account activities pending verification of my identity and confirmation that the attempts were indeed fraudulent. Miss Chen, the bank security officer explained, we take these breaches very seriously. Your accounts are now under enhanced protection protocols, but we recommend that you consider additional security measures, given the sophistication of these attempts. The enhanced protection included biometric verification requirements for any future transactions, additional authentication steps for online access, and immediate notification of any unusual activity. While these measures would make accessing my own accounts more complicated, they would also make unauthorized access virtually impossible. Wednesday evening, David called with disturbing news. Lisa had contacted him, demanding that he convince me to drop the criminal charges against her. She says she has information about your offshore accounts that could cause tax problems if it becomes public during the trial, David told me. She's threatening to turn you in to the IRS for tax evasion if you don't withdraw the charges. I felt a familiar cold anger rising in my chest. Lisa was now attempting to extort me using threats about perfectly legal financial arrangements that she didn't understand. David, those accounts are completely legitimate. Your father set them up with proper legal and tax advice, and I've reported all income and followed all disclosure requirements. Lisa's threats are empty because she doesn't understand international tax law.
But what if she tries to make trouble anyway? Then my tax attorney will explain to the IRS why a convicted felon's accusations should be disregarded. David, I'm not backing down because Lisa is desperate. Thursday brought the news I'd been both expecting and dreading. Lisa had been arrested attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. Airport security had flagged her because she was carrying multiple passports with different names and a briefcase full of fraudulent financial documents. Detective Martinez called to update me on the arrest. She had documents purporting to give her power of attorney over your offshore accounts, plus identification documents for 3 different identities. It appears she was planning to travel to the Cayman Islands to attempt in-person access to your accounts. The audacity was breathtaking. Lisa had created fake power of attorney documents for international use and had somehow obtained false identification documents. She'd been planning to physically travel to the bank and convince them to give her access to my accounts. Detective Martinez, how did she get false passports? We're still investigating that. The documents were sophisticated enough to suggest she had connections to organized fraud networks. The FBI is very interested in those connections. Friday afternoon, James called with an update on the legal proceeding. Lisa had been denied bail due to flight risk and the federal charges that had been added to her case. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her attorneys were already discussing plea bargain options. Margaret, the prosecutor wants to meet with you next week to discuss your victim impact statement. Given the scope of Lisa's crimes and the potential for a federal racketeering case, your testimony will be crucial. The prospect of testifying against my son's wife in a federal courtroom was daunting, but I knew it was necessary. Lisa had demonstrated that she wouldn't stop her criminal activities voluntarily, and other potential victims needed to be protected. Saturday morning, I sat in my garden with a cup of coffee, watching the autumn leaves fall from the oak tree where my grandchildren play. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, police interviews, and security upgrades, but for the first time since returning from San Francisco, I felt truly safe. My accounts were secure, my assets were protected, and Lisa was in custody facing serious federal charges. The immediate threat was over, but the emotional healing would take much longer. David stopped by that afternoon with Emma and Lucas. The children were excited to show me their Halloween costumes, and their innocent enthusiasm was a welcome contrast to the serious adult concerns that had dominated recent weeks. "Mom," David said as we watched the children try on their costumes, "I've been thinking about what you said about Dad's financial planning. Would you be willing to teach me about asset protection and international banking? I want to understand what he set up and why." The request touched me deeply. David wasn't asking out of greed or curiosity, but out of a genuine desire to understand the financial legacy his father had created, and to learn from the experience we'd just survived. "I'd be happy to teach you everything your father taught me," I said. "But first, let's make sure this legal situation is completely resolved." "What happens to Lisa now?" "That depends on her attorneys and the federal prosecutors. But David, regardless of what happens to her legally, you and the children are always welcome in my life. Lisa's crimes don't change how I feel about my family." As evening approached and David prepared to take the children home, Emma ran over to hug me goodbye. "Grandma, why has Mommy been gone so long?" she asked with the innocent directness of an 8-year-old. "Sometimes adults have to figure out complicated problems, sweetheart, but Daddy and I will always be here for you." After they left, I called Dorothy to update her on the week's developments. She'd been following the case closely, and was relieved to hear that Lisa was in custody. "Maggie, I have to ask, are you okay? Really okay? This has been incredibly stressful." "I'm better than okay. I'm proud of myself for fighting back, and I'm grateful for friends like you who helped me through this. What's next for you?" I looked around my house, at the family photos on the mantle, and the garden visible through my kitchen window. "Next, I focus on rebuilding trust with David, and being the grandmother Emma and Lucas deserve. The money was never the most important thing anyway, and the offshore account, they'll remain exactly where Robert intended them to be, protected and secure for whatever the future brings. But now I know I can protect myself and my family from people who would exploit our trust." Sunday evening, I received a call from the federal prosecutor assigned to Lisa's case. The plea bargain discussions had broken down because Lisa was refusing to provide information about her connections to other fraud networks. Mrs. Chen, it looks like this case will go to trial. Are you prepared to testify about what she did to your family? I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to ensure that Lisa faces appropriate consequences and that other families are protected from her crimes. Thank you. Justice depends on victims like you who are willing to stand up and tell their story. As I hung up the phone, I thought about Robert and the lessons he'd taught me about protecting what matters most. He'd prepared me financially for emergencies, but more importantly, he'd taught me to be strong enough to defend our family when threatened. Lisa had underestimated the woman she'd tried to victimize, assuming that a 67-year-old widow would be too confused or frightened to fight back effectively. Instead, she'd discovered that some battles are won not with deception and manipulation, but with preparation, determination, and the support of people who genuinely care about your welfare. The war wasn't over yet, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The trial began on a cold February morning, 4 months after Lisa's arrest. I sat in the federal courthouse, wearing my best navy suit, the same one I'd worn to that first meeting with James Rodriguez. The courtroom was packed with journalists, law enforcement officials, and other victims who had come forward after Lisa's arrest made national news. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Santos, had built an ironclad case. Over 3 days, the jury heard testimony from bank officials, computer forensics experts, and 6 other elderly victims from 3 different states who had fallen prey to Lisa's scheme.
The pattern was always the same: befriend a vulnerable senior, manufacture a crisis requiring financial intervention, forge documents to gain control, then systematically drain their assets. When my turn came to testify, I looked directly at Lisa as I described how she had violated my trust and manipulated my son. She sat motionless, showing no emotion, as if the woman who had threatened and extorted me had been replaced by a stranger. "Miss Chen," Attorney Santos asked, "what impact did the defendant's actions have on your family?" "She didn't just steal my financial security," I replied. "She stole my son's trust in his own judgment and forced my grandchildren to live through their parents' divorce. The money can be recovered, but the family damage will take years to heal." David testified the following day, his voice breaking as he described how Lisa had convinced him that I was losing my mental capacity. The jury watched with obvious sympathy as my son explained how his love for me had been weaponized against our entire family. Lisa's defense attorney tried to portray her as a well-meaning woman whose concern for elderly welfare had led to poor judgment, but the evidence was overwhelming. The forged documents, the systematic password changes, the attempted flight to the Cayman Islands with false identification, it painted a picture of calculated criminal intent that no amount of legal maneuvering could explain away. The verdict came after less than 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts: identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and federal racketeering charges. Lisa showed no reaction as the judge read each guilty verdict, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she was led away in handcuffs. Sentencing took place 6 weeks later. Judge Patricia Williams had clearly been moved by the victim impact statements, particularly testimonies from elderly victims in other states who had lost their life savings to Lisa's schemes. "Chen," Judge Williams said, looking directly at Lisa, "you targeted the most vulnerable members of our society and exploited their trust for personal gain. Your actions demonstrate a pattern of predatory behavior that requires significant incarceration to protect the public." The sentence was 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Lisa would also be required to pay full restitution to all victims, though her assets had been largely depleted by legal fees and hidden offshore accounts of her own. As we left the courthouse, David walked beside me in thoughtful silence. Our relationship had been fundamentally changed by the experience, but it had also been strengthened in unexpected ways. "Mom," he said as we reached my car, "I've been thinking about what you offered to teach me about Dad's financial planning. I'm ready to learn." 6 months later, I sat in my garden on a warm summer evening, watching Emma and Lucas play on the swing set while David grilled hamburgers on the patio. The children had adapted to their new reality with the resilience that children possess, and David had emerged from his divorce proceedings with primary custody and a renewed appreciation for the importance of financial security. "Grandma," Emma said, running over with grass stains on her dress, "Daddy says you're really smart about money and that's why the bad lady couldn't steal from you." "Your daddy is right, sweetheart. Sometimes people try to take things that don't belong to them, but if you're prepared and have good friends to help you, you can protect what's important. Will you teach me about money too? When you're older, I'll teach you everything your grandfather taught me." David approached with a plate of perfectly grilled burgers. "Mom, I got the documentation from the estate attorney today. The trust structures are exactly as you described them. I'm amazed at how thoroughly Dad planned for contingency. Your father always said that hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I never imagined the worst would come from within our own family, but his preparations saved us anyway." As evening settled over my neighborhood, I reflected on how much had changed since that October day, when I'd returned from San Francisco to find my life turned upside down. The money was safe, the legal battles were over, and my family was healing. But more importantly, I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed. The offshore accounts remained exactly where Robert had established them, protected by international banking laws and security protocols that had proven unbreachable. But the real security had come from the network of allies who had helped me fight back: Dorothy with her unwavering friendship, Kevin with his technical expertise, James with his legal acumen, and ultimately David with his willingness to choose truth over comfort. My phone rang, interrupting my peaceful reflection. It was Detective Martinez with an update I'd been expecting. "Mrs. Chen, I wanted to let you know that Lisa's case has led to the arrest of 4 other people involved in her fraud network. Your willingness to testify and fight back has helped protect dozens of other potential victims." After hanging up, I looked around my garden, at the flowers I'd planted and nurtured, at the home Robert and I had built together, at the family that had survived its greatest. Lisa had tried to steal not just my money, but my independence, my dignity, and my family's trust. Instead, she had underestimated a woman who had been prepared for battle long before the war began. The evening breeze rustled through the oak tree where my grandchildren played, carrying with it the promise of all the tomorrows that were now secure because I had refused to surrender what was rightfully mine. Some passwords I had learned simply cannot be changed by anyone except the rightful owner. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.